They built a floating restaurant on my lake. They threw a party to celebrate. By morning, the party was over and the lake was gone. I moved back to the lake after the worst year of my life. People talk about grief like it's a storm you wait out. They say you just need time. But after I lost my wife, Clara, and our little boy, Sam, in the accident that happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I didn't want time. I wanted the deep, heavy silence that only this place could offer. I wanted the kind of quiet where my memories could live without being drowned out by the world. The doctors called it recovery. My friends called it healing. But I knew it was just surviving, and I was tired of barely surviving. That lake, our lake, was the only piece of earth that didn't feel like a monument to everything I'd lost. It was the place we escaped to on summer weekends, back before life got so complicated with work and schedules and all the noise of the city. Clara would pack a picnic basket with sandwiches and lemonade, and Sam would drag his little fishing pole behind him, asking a million questions about the fish and the frogs and why water looked blue sometimes and green other times. The water was always the same, still, dark, and endlessly patient. It was mine in a way that nothing else had ever been mine. I'd inherited it all from my grandfather, a water engineer who had spent his life studying rivers and lakes before buying this entire hidden valley decades ago. He wasn't a rich man, but he was smart, and he saw the value in this secluded piece of land when everyone else thought it was worthless. Most people who fished from the public shore never knew the lake was private. There were no fences, no keep out signs, just a long, winding dirt road through the trees and the gentle sound of water lapping at the shore. Grandpa always said signs were for people who didn't respect boundaries anyway, and he preferred to trust in common decency. I wonder what he would think of common decency today. After the funeral, I walked away from everything. My job as a building inspector, my house in the city, all of it. I didn't give 2 weeks' notice. I just left. My boss called 3 times before I finally turned my phone off for good. I packed a single duffel bag with clothes, a few books, and the wooden bird Sam had carved in shop class, got in my truck, and drove 5 hours north until I reached the rusty gate that marked the entrance to the property. The old cabin was weathered but strong, built into a hill that looked right out over the water. For months, I didn't look at a screen. I read books by lantern light, cooked food over the fire, and spent my evenings sitting on the dock, watching the stars reflect on the black water. Some days I would talk to Clara and Sam as if they were sitting there with me. Other days I just listened to the silence. The HOA didn't exist for me back then. I'd seen the signs for Pinecrest Estates near the main road, but they felt like decorations, part of some other world that had nothing to do with me. My land was separate, older, a world away from their neatly trimmed lawns and identical mailboxes. The cabin had been here since the 1950s, long before the first foundation was poured for Pinecrest Estates. Or at least, that's what I believed. I was about to learn that boundaries on paper mean very little to people who want what you have. It all started with a letter. A plain white envelope left in my mailbox down by the county road. No return address, just the words, Pinecrest Community Association, Official Integration Notice. The paper felt expensive, thick between my fingers. Inside was a single page, neatly typed, informing me that my lake had been voluntarily designated as a shared community amenity space. There was language about enhancing property values and community enrichment. At the very bottom, in smaller print, it mentioned that preliminary construction permits are pending approval. That word hit me like a physical blow. I almost laughed, a bitter, broken sound that startled a bird from a nearby tree. Voluntarily? But certainly not by me. I hadn't volunteered for anything since Sam's school bake sale 2 years ago. I stood there for a long time, just staring at those words, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't an invitation. It was a declaration. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the wood stove. I watched the flames lick at the expensive paper until it was nothing but ash. I told myself it was a mistake, some bureaucratic error that would sort itself out. Maybe someone at the county office had mixed up property lines. These things happen, I reasoned. They'd realize their error and that would be the end of it. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. 2 weeks later, I heard the sound of a boat engine. Not the gentle putter of a fishing boat, but the steady thrum of something larger. I was drinking coffee on the porch when I saw it, a large pontoon boat drifting in the middle of my lake. 2 men in collared shirts were on board, dropping measuring equipment into the water. They were talking and laughing like they owned the place, one of them gesturing broadly as if explaining where something should go. I put my coffee down so hard it sloshed over the rim, burning my hand. I walked quickly down to the dock, my heart pounding in my ears. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice carrying across the water. "This is private property. You need to leave." The man at the wheel turned, gave me a casual wave as if I were a friendly neighbor, and went back to his work. They completely ignored me. I stood there, feeling foolish and furious, watching them continue their measurements as if I didn't exist. After 20 minutes, they started the engine and puttered off toward the other shore, still chatting amiably. The next morning, I found a bright yellow sign tied to my favorite pine tree with thick plastic zip ties. Approved construction site. It read in bold black letters. The Lakeside Patio, Pinecrest HOA. There was a phone number at the bottom, and in smaller print, "Violators will be prosecuted." The irony of that last part would make me laugh later, but in that moment, I just saw red. I called the number 3 times. Each time it went straight to a generic voicemail. "You've reached the Pinecrest Community Association. Please leave your name, number, and reason for calling, and we'll get back to you within 48 hours. I didn't leave a message. What would I say? "Hi, you're trespassing on my property?" That's when I knew this was no mistake. This was a coordinated takeover. They weren't confused about the property lines. They were ignoring them. I drove to the county records office that afternoon, my grandfather's old property deeds shaking in my hands. The building smelled of old paper and cleaning supplies. The clerk, a kind woman named Sarah who remembered my grandfather, pulled up the maps on her computer. Her fingers tapped efficiently at the keyboard as she searched through digital archives. "Mr. Evans," she said after a few minutes, looking from the screen to my papers and back again, "according to all our records, you're the sole owner of the lake and the surrounding land. There's no HOA jurisdiction here whatsoever. The Pinecrest development stops exactly 200 feet from your western boundary." She turned the screen to show me the detailed map, my property outlined in bold red against the neighboring parcels. "Then can you make them stop?" I asked, hope rising in my chest like a physical thing. "Can you send someone out there to tell them they're wrong?" She gave me a sympathetic look, the kind people give you when they're about to deliver bad news. "I can confirm your ownership, but I can't enforce it. That's not my department. You'll need to get a lawyer involved, I'm afraid. The planning department might be able to help if they're building without permits, but..." She trailed off, her meaning clear. The system moved slowly, and the builders were already on my land. I drove home with the truth in my pocket, but it felt useless, like a shield made of paper. The law moved too slowly, through channels and procedures and waiting periods. The builders, I would soon learn, did not. A week later, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery, the grinding roar of diesel engines and the beep-beep-beep of vehicles backing up. They'd bulldozed a path through the woods on the north end of my property, tearing up ferns and saplings I'd watched grow for years. Flatbed trucks were unloading construction materials directly onto a floating platform that hadn't been there the day before. It must have been assembled elsewhere and towed in during the night while I slept. I pulled on jeans and boots and ran out the door, not even bothering with a jacket. "What do you think you're doing?" I yelled at the nearest worker, a young man carrying a stack of 2x4s. "This is private property." A big man with a beard and a hard hat walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "We got permission, buddy. From the HOA. The HOA doesn't own this land," I said, my voice rising. "I do. I have the papers inside. I was just at the county office yesterday. The man just shrugged, unaffected. Not my problem. I just do what I'm told. You take it up with them. He turned his back on me and started directing another worker where to place the lumber. I called the sheriff's office from my landline, my hands shaking so badly I misdialed twice. Deputy Miller arrived about 40 minutes later, his cruiser kicking up gravel on my driveway. He remembered me from high school, though we'd never been friends. He was a year ahead, played football while I spent my time in the library. "John," he said, shaking my hand. "Thanks for coming out, Tim," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I really appreciate it." I showed him all the documents, the deed, the survey maps, everything Sarah had printed for me at the records office. I pointed out the window at the men working on the floating platform. He listened carefully, nodding occasionally. "Okay, John," he said. "Let me go talk to them." He walked down to the shore and spoke with the bearded foreman for a few minutes. I watched from the porch, hoping to see some sign that he was telling them to pack up and leave. Instead, he just nodded, made a few notes on his pad, and walked back to me. He had a resigned expression, the look of a man who's about to deliver news he knows you won't want to hear. "I'm real sorry, John," he said. "They say they have HOA approval and a building permit from the county. Until a judge rules otherwise, my hands are tied. This is a civil matter." "So they can just build?" I asked, disbelief turning to fury. "They can just drive onto my land, destroy my trees, and build whatever they want, and you can't do anything?" "I'm afraid so," he said. "The best I can do is advise you to get a lawyer, and you need to do it fast. Once they get further along, it becomes harder to undo." He got in his car and drove away. I stood on my porch, watching the construction continue, feeling completely helpless. The law was supposed to protect me, but it was moving too slowly, buried in paperwork and procedures. The builders were moving fast, as if they knew their window of opportunity was limited. They were establishing facts on the ground, or in this case, on the water. That night, I didn't sleep. The noise of construction had finally stopped around dusk, but the violation echoed in the silence. They were stealing the last sacred place I had, the one spot where I could still feel connected to Clara and Sam. I walked through the dark cabin, past the empty chairs and the silent rooms, and found myself standing at the window, staring at the moonlit water. The floating platform was a dark blotch against the silver surface, a cancer on something beautiful. And then, staring at the water, I remembered. My grandfather's words came back to me from a childhood summer decades ago. He'd taken me down to the dock on a day just like this, the air warm and heavy with the smell of pine. "This lake has a secret, Michael," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder. "I gave it a voice. And one day, you might need to let it speak." At the time, I'd thought he was just telling another of his stories. But now, the memory came back with crystal clarity. He'd shown me something hidden, something important. I grabbed a flashlight and a shovel from the garage and went down to the dock. The moon was bright enough that I almost didn't need the flashlight. Behind the old boathouse, buried under years of dirt and leaves, was a heavy iron hatch I'd walked over 1,000 times without noticing. It took all my strength to pry it open, the rust screaming in protest. The hatch revealed concrete steps descending into darkness. The air below was cold and smelled of wet stone and old metal. My flashlight beam found it in the center of the small chamber, a massive iron wheel, bigger than a car's steering wheel, connected to a pipe that vanished into the earth. The main drainage control for the entire lake. My grandfather, the engineer, had built a failsafe. His final gift to me. I didn't touch it that night. I just stood there, my hand resting on the cold metal, feeling the potential energy stored in that simple machine. But for the first time since the letters started coming, I didn't feel helpless. The legal fight began the next morning. I found a lawyer in town, a man named Robert Hayes who specialized in property disputes. He had a no-nonsense manner that I appreciated. I showed him all my papers and told him about the HOA. He listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes. "They're in the wrong, John," he said when I finished. "No question. We'll send them a cease and desist letter today. That's a formal legal document telling them to stop immediately or face legal consequences." I felt a little better walking out of his office. The law was finally on my side, or would be soon. That afternoon, I drove to the Pinecrest HOA office. It was a new, shiny building with glass doors and potted plants in the lobby. I walked in and placed the lawyer's envelope on the front desk. The young woman there didn't even look up from her computer. "I'm here to deliver a cease and desist to the HOA board," I said to the top of her head. "They're in a meeting," she said, still typing. "Then make sure they get it," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. As I turned to leave, a door opened and a woman walked out. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a pantsuit that probably cost more than my truck. She looked me up and down like I was something she'd stepped in, her gaze lingering on my worn jeans and work boots. "Mr. Evans, I assume?" she said, her voice cool and measured. "I'm Deborah Shaw. I'm the president of the Pinecrest HOA. I'm here to tell you that you are trespassing," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite my shaking hands. "That is private property, and you need to remove your structure immediately." She gave me a thin, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We have documentation that suggests otherwise. This lake is a shared resource that benefits the entire community. The Lakeside Patio is a community project. It's very popular." "I don't care if it's the most popular thing in the world," I said. "If you don't get off my lake in 48 hours, my lawyer will get a judge to force you off." Her smile never wavered. "We'll see." I turned and walked out before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From rage. The sheer arrogance of her, standing there in her expensive suit, telling me what I could and couldn't do with my own property. They did not stop. Of course they didn't. In fact, they worked faster, as if racing against the legal clock I'd just started. Walls went up on the floating platform, then a roof. They installed bright LED spotlights on all four corners so they could work after dark. The lights shone directly into my cabin all night long, casting strange shadows on the walls and making it impossible to sleep. The peace I'd come here to find was utterly destroyed, replaced by the constant noise and light of invasion. Then came the invitations. Full-color brochures were delivered to every house, including mine. They showed a beautiful painting of the finished restaurant, the Lakeside Patio, with happy, well-dressed couples dining at candlelit tables on the deck. The text gushed about farm-to-table cuisine and stunning sunset views. It announced the grand opening celebration for the following Saturday night. There was even a quote from a local chef who said he was thrilled to be part of this exciting community project. They'd planned it all, down to the last detail, as if my ownership was just a minor inconvenience to be brushed aside. The night of the party, I sat in my dark living room and watched. Dozens of cars streamed down the road, their headlights cutting through the twilight. People arrived dressed in summer finery, the women in sundresses, the men in polo shirts. Music blared from speakers on the floating restaurant, some upbeat jazz number that felt completely wrong for the quiet lake. I could see people laughing and chatting, glasses in hand, as servers circulated with trays of food. Deborah Shaw stood on a makeshift stage with a microphone. Her voice, amplified and tinny, echoed across the water. "Welcome to our new community treasure," she announced, gesturing grandly at the restaurant behind her. "This beautiful lake finally belongs to all of us." The crowd cheered, their applause like a physical blow. I felt something break inside me, some last thread of patience or hope. They were dancing on my family's memories, celebrating their theft of the one place where I could still feel close to Clara and Sam. I thought of the picnics we'd had on that shore, the way Sam would squeal with delight when a fish nibbled his line, the way Clara's laughter would echo across the water. And now these strangers were toasting with champagne as if they'd created this beauty, not stolen it. When the last car had left and the lights on the restaurant went out, I walked down to the iron hatch. This time, I didn't hesitate. I put my hands on the cold metal wheel and thought of Clara and Sam. I thought of their smiles, their voices, the way the sunlight caught Clara's hair when she turned her face to the sky. This was for them. The wheel resisted at first, frozen with decades of rust. I put my whole weight into it, grunting with effort, my muscles straining. For a terrible moment, I thought it wouldn't move, that my grandfather's system had failed me. Then, with a shriek of protesting metal that sounded like a battle cry, it broke free and turned. A deep, groaning rumble echoed up from the pipes below, the sound of water beginning to move. A lot of water. I turned the wheel again, and again, each rotation opening the valve wider. I didn't know how far to turn it, so I kept going until the wheel wouldn't turn anymore, until the rumble became a steady, powerful roar beneath my feet. I climbed out and sat on the dock, the cold night air sharp in my lungs. I watched the water, waiting. For the first hour, nothing seemed to change. The lake looked the same in the moonlight, the restaurant a dark silhouette against the starry sky. But if I listened closely, I could hear it. A new sound beneath the usual night noises, a low, steady gurgling that hadn't been there before. I went back to the house but didn't go to bed. I sat by the window and watched as the night deepened. Around 3 a.m., I saw the first change. A thin, dark line of wet mud appearing along the shoreline where water had been just hours before. The lake was pulling back, slowly revealing its secrets. I made a pot of coffee as the sky began to lighten and continued to watch. It was like witnessing a slow-motion miracle. By 7 a.m., the line of mud was 6 feet wide in places. The water level was clearly dropping. The floating restaurant looked different. It was sitting lower in the water, its deck tilting almost imperceptibly. By 8 a.m., things started to happen faster. The restaurant began to list noticeably to one side. The tilt was enough to make the tables and chairs on the deck slide slowly toward the low end. I saw a potted plant tip over, dirt spilling across the deck boards. By 9 a.m., the scene was unbelievable. The lake was half gone. Vast plains of thick, glistening mud stretched out where deep water had been just yesterday. The Lakeside Patio was not a floating restaurant anymore. It was a building stuck in the mud, canted over at a crazy angle, one side buried in the muck while the other pointed uselessly at the sky. It looked ridiculous and sad, a monument to arrogance sunk in its own hubris. My phone started ringing at 9:15. I looked at the screen. It was Deborah Shaw. I smiled for the first time in weeks and let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text message from a neighbor I barely knew. It was a picture of the drained lake with the text, "What happened? Is this your doing?" The news spread like wildfire. By 10 a.m., a small crowd had gathered on the shore across from my property. People were pointing and taking pictures with their phones. I saw Deborah Shaw arrive, her car screeching to a halt on the gravel road. She got out and just stood there, her mouth hanging open, staring at the mud and the ruined restaurant. The expression on her face was almost worth the months of frustration. It was a deeply satisfying sight. A local news reporter showed up with a camera at around 11. The story led the noon broadcast. Homeowner drains lake, sinks HOA's illegal restaurant. They'd even gotten drone footage of the tilted structure surrounded by mud. The HOA tried to blame me, of course. Deborah Shaw gave a tearful interview to another station, calling me a vandal and a criminal. She said I had destroyed community property and endangered wildlife. She didn't mention that the community property was sitting on my private lake. But this time, when the police came, it was different. I showed them everything. The deeds, the drainage system, the photos of the construction, the cease and desist letter. Deputy Miller returned, and I took him down to the vault and showed him the valve. He shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Your granddad thought of everything, didn't he?" The police agreed that I had every right to control the water level on my own property. I hadn't broken any law. If anything, I'd exercised my property rights. The court case was brief. The judge, an older man who remembered my grandfather, ruled in my favor on every count. The HOA was ordered to pay for the complete cleanup of the mess and substantial damages for trespass and emotional distress. Deborah Shaw and the entire board were forced to resign after a recall vote by furious residents who discovered how much their legal adventure had cost them. In the quiet that followed, as autumn rains slowly refilled the lake, something in me healed along with the land. The new HOA board sent a formal apology signed by every member. Neighbors I'd never met came by to introduce themselves, many bringing small gifts, a pie, a six-pack of beer, a hand-knitted scarf, or simply saying thank you for standing up to the bullying. The couple with the little girl who loved the lake brought me another drawing, this one of the lake full again with a bright yellow sun overhead. Now, when I sit on the dock at sunset, the water is still and deep again. The silence has returned, but it's different now, not the silence of running away from the world, but the silence of peace earned. The lake is mine again, not just as property, but as a promise kept to my family and to myself. Claire and Sam would be proud, I think. I can almost hear their laughter on the wind, see their smiles in the dancing light on the water. If you've ever stood up for what's yours, you know why I had to do it. Thanks for watching.